Governance. There's a couple pieces to governance. We can talk about identity sources or third party as well as role-based access control. So let's start there and we're going to build into it. First off, Morpheus does support a ton of integrations with third-party identity source management. Say you want to tie in your Active Directory, Jump Cloud, Okta. There's one login, custom APIs. You can do that. You can drill into your tenants. Morpheus is a multi-tenant compatible environment, so managed service providers love that. You can go in here and say, I want to create an identity source for this tenant. I've got some Active Directory set up here, for example. When you set up these, there's multiple types. So if I could say I want to add an identity source, for example, I could pick a type. These are some of the supported options.
Are you working on Azure Active Directory?
It works already. You can just tie in the Active Directory and link it. We have a customer who's done that. I don't have the full guide on how to do it with me right now, but we have seen them do it. When you set it up, some cool things you can do is you can set kind of how you talk to your AD server. You can also set up mapping. So when we start getting into roles, you can map your AD groups to the Morpheus role mapping. So what features do they have access to? Maybe you have a generic developer role, or maybe you have just a monitoring or reporting role from an executive level where they want to see some cost reporting, things like that. You can do that here. Going back to roles now, there are two types of roles. There's tenant roles and user roles. You'll see the type. A tenant role is a high-level role that can be applied globally across a tenant. So you can create a subtenant. It could be a different department in the organization or a different company entirely. And you may want to restrict access to certain feature sets that Morpheus provides. Maybe you don't want them to utilize backups in your tool, or maybe you don't want them to muck about with the third-party integrations, things like that. You can lock that stuff down. Every feature in Morpheus can be locked down. So say I wanted to do that. There's a developer role here. You can see the feature access controls here. So they basically target mostly from the navigation perspective. And they do have different levels. They have full, you can see there's user scope where they only see their stuff versus the entire tenant stuff. You can set that. So maybe you have a user, you only want them to see their instances they've created, not everyone's in the tenant. You can do that. You can make it read-only where they can just view and can't make changes. All those types of things. And then a user can be assigned multiple roles and they stack on top so you can build out what they have access to.
How does that play out when you're talking about specific providers where you're putting bespoke options that only that cloud provider allows? Does that come through to here for the privileges to?
Some of those do, yes. The other way you would do it is based on the resource allocation. So when I start, this is the top level, and then we have to start talking about assigning permissions to resources provided by a cloud, which is different. So this is kind of the high-level feature set, and then we'll drill into the resource or asset permissions. Another option you have is group access. So I provisioned into the All Clouds demo. That group may have its own policies on it. It may be where you're organizing your instances. You can control group access at a role level. So this one's set to custom rather than full. And they have access to, in this case, the Atom group. But I could simply say, I want this guy to get All Clouds demo as well, or just read access and do that. So you can kind of chain those together. You can use this to organize projects or teams, things like that. You also have instance type access, and this is basically the service catalog. What are they allowed to provision? Do I want them to provision Cassandra clusters? Maybe not. I can turn that off. Or maybe I don't want them to provision an Exchange server, things like that. You can completely control that here.
So that makes sense when you're setting something up new, net new. What happens when you change the underlying services? Like, let's say, for instance, instead of using AWS, now you're going to use Azure as part of your package for the application stack. What happens to the existing instances? Do they just stay where they are?
Yeah.
Okay, so they don't change. So
they don't change.
Nothing changes there. Is there an option to change it?
If you want to move an instance, there's a way to do migration. Typically, when we do a move type of workflow, say you're moving from AWS to Azure, we don't destroy the AWS side. We leave it there so you can verify before you destroy, right?
Because I mean, conceptually, the reason why I'm asking about this, and again, I'm kind of coming from that executive persona, if I've done a better deal with another provider, and now my pricing structure has changed, so my whole cost structure has changed for a particular offering, right. Is there a way to be able to say, okay, now I want to move off of provider A to provider B? Is there a way to help me kind of make
steer your developers or
well, not just steer net new, because that's the easy part, right? That's easy because it doesn't exist anywhere. The harder problem is, how do I take my existing workloads and steer them in a different direction?
Right.
Or shift them across?
Right. There's a couple answers to that. This gets a little out of governance in that concept, but more in migration. So we do have migration wizards where we can move compute. So like say you've got VMware VMs and you want to move them into AWS, you can do that. Morpheus will facilitate a wizard and tooling to allow you to do that. But in a lot of cases, there are environments where you kind of need to be more aware of the application you're moving, the workload you're moving, not just I'm moving compute, right? So in that case, we do provide some tooling with, for example, if I'm doing horizontal scale, I've got my web servers in Azure, I'm moving them to Amazon, we can facilitate a rollout and roll in via the load balancer.
Do you have a means to even highlight that to the Morpheus admin, so to speak, and be able to say, okay, you've made these dynamic changes, we'd recommend that you move these workloads or move these processes from this service to this service as a function of that underlying change?
Not currently, no, we don't.
Because I would think that would be a real interesting insight that I have to do manually today.
Right.
I don't have a means
guidance
to do
kind of
otherwise.
ties into that a little bit, but it's kind of one of those.
Yeah, late last year we did release kind of the first version of our analytics and guidance more on within a given scope cloud. I'm high cost, low utilization, or the other extreme, and can I downsize, apply a power schedule? I think what you're getting at is, could you apply that to an adjacent cloud that's in the library that has a different cost dynamic and provide some of those recommendations to move across clouds, not just right size within a cloud. And for sure, I think that's a direction we can look at.
This gets to a bigger problem, so I'm bringing this kind of full circle back to where you started, which is you're trying to kind of get your arms around the sprawl, right? You use that word sprawl. But in reality, I'm not seeing how it necessarily does that without providing some level of guidance to say, you know what, you need to pull in these pieces and you can be more efficient or more effective in managing your environment.
Yeah, I think with its start as a self-service provisioning engine, where we spent a lot of the time is around provisioning and automation, because we were in the control plane and we knew what people had provisioned. Adding the kind of analytics and right sizing within a cloud was a pretty natural fit. I mean, the team.
And we haven't really gotten into brownfield yet.
Yeah, I think that is. It's one. If you talk about horizontal, our challenge of being broad and deep. I think we took a step left and said, hey, yeah, we can give you some guidance and analytics to be smarter within the clouds that we've either discovered from brownfield or provisioned. I think one of those choice points that we'll have from an engineering perspective is, do we go deep around one, or do we kind of keep moving out and take analytics to a multi-tiered app perspective across multiple clouds? That's a choice point. There are a lot of companies who've started in this orchestration from the cloud kind of cloud health, you got cloudability. You've got a lot of people who were very focused on like the costing of cloud utilization, and so those are features we could add. Those are partnerships we could make. When you start talking cloud management, and you dig into everyone who calls themselves a cloud management platform, and then what are the discrete functions that they provide? It's fairly broad. There are a lot of and some started more from the analytics and the costing perspective, some more from the provisioning perspective, and they're starting to.
I think the
homogenize a bit
is quite interesting as well. So like if you plug into all these clouds, then you start scanning against either predefined best practices or what that corporate has defined. So like AWS, you can plug in 5 different AWS accounts. Have they got MFA on the root account? All sorts of things like that. You can actually give some value rather than just, hey, we can see all these clouds. We don't know what state they're in or what you're using them for.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we're kind of building out in Discovery. The way the guidance engine is built is it's a pluggable Discovery service engine. So we have lots of room to grow in that area.
Yeah, we're probably in the first inning of our move into more the analytics and the right-sizing perspective, for sure.
So David, can I just ask you a question on your installation there? Because you've been talking about security. You've got the keys to the kingdom in your VM. So how tightly is it tied down?
Very tightly.
How safely can people be happy about?
So we've been through several security audits and things like that. We've passed all of them. We have AES 256-bit encryption on almost every secure field in the system, and including non-secure stuff, just to be safe. So most of your configuration data, when you're doing an app template and they have those initial passwords, that's encrypted in the database. You can't decode it. That kind of stuff is put in. We also have instituted things like Cypher. which is similar to HashiCorp's Vault. It's 3 levels of AES 256-bit encryption, where you can put keys and passwords and reference them and use those to do dynamic password generation in your provisioning workflows, things like that. So you can use them in your scripts. There's
Salt and hash the text?
Yeah.
Salted and hashed, okay.
So I think one of the things that I haven't quite wrapped my head around is where do you guys start and stop from being, are you the building blocks to create a PaaS? Do you guys sell yourselves as strictly kind of an infrastructure as a service abstraction layer? Where's the, like, where you kind of bleed over in both areas? I can see.
Yeah, that's why we kind of go for the unified ops orchestration. We're not an IaaS solution, but we do encompass IaaS. We have to be able to provide the services we provide. Same with PaaS. We aren't necessarily marketing ourselves as a PaaS solution. We tie into Cloud Foundry for things like that. But can we provide platform as a service? As you saw with app templates, essentially you can. It all depends on what level your company's at or what use case they have. Maybe they want to go that direction or they don't. So that's that agnostic approach. Everyone has a different style.
Can you integrate with Vault?
Yes, we do that as well. There's two different use cases. Vault is great, but this also allows you to do things more kind of nested into like your provisioning scripts and things like that. You can reference things. Another cool one you can do, and I have an example of it, is Terraform. So you've got your TFRs with your secrets for how you talk to Terraform. You can actually save a cipher TFRs and reference that. So your Terraform state and scripts automatically run against cipher encrypted TFRs files. So
Cybrock?
I'm not familiar with that.
Just a question on further on the security side of things. This is all good for someone has made off with my VM that runs all of this stuff, but it's a web interface and I can log into it. Do you do things like two-factor authentication?
Yeah, so the way we typically do that is we tell you to tie in JumpCloud or Okta or something like that, and then you can do MFA. A lot of people do that. We have a couple customers who have Okta or those types of tools, and automatically will do the JumpCloud. I think, is Sandbox doing Azure AD?
Yeah, if you plug into Azure AD, you should be able to do it too.
Yeah.
Definitely set up with AD.
Yeah. So see that option comes up.
Okay.
And on the API side, actually, there are limits to that too. Sometimes we can use your AD account for that, but typically you need a service account. Typically when you start talking to the API, we use OAuth for that.
At some point, do you guys have kind of a picture of a typical deployment? Saw the one where you guys were kind of in the middle, but that didn't map to services. So you guys provide a lot of services, and the temptation is to say, oh, I will use, this is back to my past, and I can use you guys as a PaaS. But there's a lot of work to get it to where, where you say Cloud Foundry is best. I could consume Kubernetes directly. You guys don't prevent me from doing that, but you would encourage me to go through you guys. So it would be great to see just a map of, like, from an API perspective and the providers underneath to help kind of wrap my head around where's the relationship of the developer to your platform and the services that you abstract away. I missed that picture.
Yeah, one of the,
Sorry.
because it's sitting in David's email box for, no, I've got a technical white paper actually in development, because as you can kind of see, getting a map of services and relationships and workflows in a easy to consume way is a bit of a challenge. So it is something we're working on, because you're right, as we spread, beyond some of those global enterprise customers, and we're, trying to get out in the market, being able to wrap your head around it visually, and a lot of visual learners, so.
Okay. I'm going to go back to governance a little bit here. So we talked about just building roles, right, and feature and group access. Another thing we can do is we can control resources that we can share out a cloud to a tenant, for example. So, for example, I've got my labs VMware cloud here. I can click, I'm on my local. Let me go back to the other one. We've got our VMware vCenter. You can see the status is okay. I can see the last sync date was at 10:55 a.m. It took 7 seconds to sync. I can actually see all my hypervisors and their utilization across that cluster. So with regards to things like VMware, you get a little bit more detail than you would get from a public cloud where you don't see the hypervisor, things like that. You can see your Docker hosts, and you can also provision these Docker hosts from here. Those can be Kubernetes, Docker Swarm, or just plain Docker with our own orchestrator. So you got multiple options.
I noticed you have an unmanaged category in there. Is it possible to bring existing assets under management
Yes.
and then analyze what those assets are doing and bring it into some sort of framework? Just to go back to Tim's point about the problem is not necessarily provisioning new stuff, it's bringing your existing stuff under
Exactly.
governance and management.
That's why when you ask the
how does that
questions, like
work?
there's a piece missing that might help fill in some of the details on that. So you see this virtual machines tab, and you'll notice the type says unmanaged. These are syncing every 5 minutes from your cloud. The unmanaged means this Morpheus appliance did not deploy those. They're being picked up. You'll also see that they do have some statistics related to them as well. They're actually getting that from the hypervisor periodically every 5 minutes. Not as fine-grained as OS level agent statistics you'll get, but still useful for guidance recommendations, things like that.
Using SNMP or something?
No, those are just actually, in this case, it's querying
the-
VMware.
Okay.
The VMware statistics engine.
Can it make a best guess at what that particular instance is doing based on network traffic or anything like that?
Yeah, so there's another feature. You turn it on in infrastructure networks, and it's called network scan. And it will run periodically. You can enable the granularity of that, and it will basically go and port scan those VMs once you start managing them and give you an idea of what's running on them. Is it running HTTP, web server, things like that? Then you can get a better idea.
Do you integrate with the AWS provider API to authorize those port scans?
Not currently. The network scan's relatively new, so we don't typically offer.
So can I just do a port scan against AWS instances? There's no warnings or anything about that, because that's something they...
Right, so typically that's kind of at a sysadmin level to turn on anyway. We don't let a developer go do that, for example, so you do have to have some control over that. But yeah,
It'd be worth coming up with some warning for that.
it would be, I agree.
And is that
And we
the
do-
real cost or just an estimation?
What's wrong with sports scan?
Down here,
Yeah,
sorry, this right here,
yeah.
there's two types of costs we do. We get the costs coming from the report, so there's two ways to do it. We actually will look at it based on the estimated cost of the object.
Okay.
So this one I think is the real right now. This is the average is the estimate. They do change, so if there's that nightly report you can run that goes to an S3 bucket in Amazon, for example. We'll pull that down every night, and we'll actually true up the cost. So you'll get an estimated cost in real time, and then you'll get the true up as well. So typically it's fairly accurate. There's some statistics we are still enhancing on cost tracking because there's very fine-grained pricing data in Amazon. So you do have to sometimes just pull that real billing report out. Yep.
A lot of people have spoken about the phenomena of bill shock when they're in public cloud. Do you do anything to address that anxiety that customers have about that?
Public.
I think that customer story of how this ran for a few days is probably.
Yeah. Guidance rightsizing caught a what is it? What is it?
7 figure or 6 figures.
Yeah, this is like $800,000 or something in savings via guidance. They had developers who were provisioning the top tier flavor of Amazon in their account. And they were using like
Those
1 gig
rich
of memory and it had 256 gig of memory.
Well, why wouldn't you?
Right. So that's one of the things they loved about Morpheus. Is one, they caught that and they got with the team and they fixed it. Saved them a lot of money right off the bat. And that was actually in a POC, so they didn't even buy the product yet, which was funny. And then
They subsequently did buy.
they did
It
subsequently
paid
buy.
for itself
Yes.
out of that.
And then they were able to actually go into Morpheus from a self-service side and say, I don't want that flavor to be an option on Amazon, things like that, and lock that down.
So you mentioned right sizing, so you're going off and finding those instances, and then you're looking at the CPU and memory
Memory.
utilization, and then some recommendations.
Right. And there's a
Then
couple
you
different
automate that. So
recommendations.
if you've got that workflow to say, change this to this instance.
So we take an approach, since guidance is relatively new, if you edit this cloud, for example, it's kind of how you would set up you can kind of see how you would set up a VMware cloud. You can scope it to a cluster, a resource pool. You can do remote procedures over VMware tools, but you can also tie in under advanced. You can set guidance to manual or off. We don't have an auto mode yet where we automatically right size. That's a safety reason. We don't want to, it's a new feature. I don't want to start automatically doing that and then be responsible for that. So we'll give you the recommendation.
But it's the idea that you're going to have to go into each individual instance to get guidance?
No,
No, this is on the cloud. So
that's like
on your
VMware as
your
a-
high-level integration when you
Okay.
tie in VMware or
Because to my earlier comment, I was thinking there's some tab or button at the top that provides me with, okay, here's a way that we think you could optimize. And then from there, I can drill down into those areas that if I make changes, it would help my situation out.
Right, and that's mostly what guidance is kind of trying to target, right?
It's the stop hitting yourself button.
So one of the things that I'm still missing, and it's a question that a couple of people have asked to this point, which is, a lot of great advantages if you're looking at this from an executive down, a lot of challenges is getting the folks on the ground to actually adopt this stuff. I can command whatever I want from the top down, but actually getting it to happen, there's two different things. Netflix went through this when they did their container implementation. They said, okay, here's the appeal of using our tightest container platform. Therefore, they sold it to developers. They started to package monolithic applications in there, and Netflix from a higher perspective saw the advantages. When I'm talking to developers, application teams, and I'm saying it is worth the effort to migrate your existing processes from the existing set of APIs to this API, what's the sale? Like other than saying because the CIO says so, in most organizations that doesn't fly because the CIO won't. What's the appeal to get the end user to start consuming this versus consuming the thing that already works today?
Because what you're fighting against is all the emotional investments that they've placed in.
And it's not just emotional investment. If I don't see a reduction in my budget directly, if I don't see productivity gains, if it's a advantage to the overall organization but not a advantage to my silo,
I'm not going to use
why bother?
To the conversation earlier, everyone needs to feel like they won, right? Or else it's going to get pocket vetoed and they'll work around it. I think when we go through from the automation side, I think hopefully you'll see how we're trying to appeal to what the developers need.
You saw like the app template stuff. That actually is a huge appeal to developers. We get a lot of traction from that side. We talk about those three different audiences that got brought up: the executive, the IT operations, and developers. The app template structure, that hybrid way to build self-service, developers love that. The API and CLI they can use, they love that. What they also like is that it it basically fits within the compliance of IT operations, so they're not battling IT all the time. And this all depends on what the organization's current level is. Are they a DevOps-oriented organization or moving to DevOps? What level in that kind of movement are they moving? This tool helps facilitate that move.
And that's in both brown and greenfield, you're finding that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So this is an example of a right-size resource. So you can see it's actually detected I'm using 3.8 gigs of 16 gigs of memory. I could probably go down to 8, things like that. So there are more different discovery modules, not just sizing. There's some cool features like unutilized or underutilized servers. It'll give you recommendations on that. Maybe it's just sitting there not doing anything. The other one is power schedule recommendations. Maybe things don't run off business hours and you want to shut them down to save on your Amazon bill or something like that. You can do that. You can apply power schedules to your VMs. There's also some analytics, and I'm kind of going kind of in analytics. I'll go back to policy, back and forth. We're just here. There's several different analytics reports that we've been building out. Another cool one that I like to show is the overall utilization versus price. So you can actually get a graph. Each one of those is representative of an instance. You can scope to specific cloud or all clouds and see, like, this thing is barely being used, but it's costing me $931 a month, right? And it's big. That's probably a problem area, right? So this kind of gives you an idea of where those problem areas are. If you see something that's low cost and it's up here, that's well utilized. It's probably a good VM to keep track of. But this kind of is that area where you probably want to focus on and drill into, kind of thing. And you kind of get the options here as to which ones are doing the most damage. And this is that exact one we looked at is at the top of the list. So.
Is there a higher level view from sort of an application perspective of, it's nice to see all of these individual VMs, but when I'm building an application, I've got 6 or 7 virtual machines that make up my application?
This report's new, so we haven't done it at the app-centric level, but that would definitely be an area we would go, because that makes a ton of sense. We do know the interdependency of that VM is related to this application and these tiers, so we know what the overall cost is. We show some of that detail on the application detail page, but we haven't translated it to a chart like this yet, but that would be definitely a good one to look into down the line.